Welcome to episode 21 of WooWoo for the Skeptic. I'm Kim Polinder, your host and curiosity advocate for the world of metaphysics. Have you ever wondered if your ex has a magic love spell placed upon you? Does your tendency towards overgiving make you feel like you're enslaved to family and friends? Is there a spiritual guru in your life who exhibits somewhat of a God complex? Well, chances are your soul may have signed you up for these experiences in a past life via something called a soul contract. Stay tuned to hear why you may want to clear these contracts. I'm so excited to be speaking with Carla Cadotte today. Carla is a psychic medium, animal communicator, ThetaHealing practitioner, Reiki master, intuitive counselor, crystal healer, and sound healing practitioner. Carla, thank you for being on the program and welcome.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell the listener how you became interested in energy healing, sound healing. I always like to hear how people went from being a quote-unquote normal person to going into the woo. So
Absolutely. Well, initially, first and foremost, my educational background was in marketing, entrepreneurial management, and advertising. But I'm somebody that actually was born with a certain gifts, say, psychically to begin with. I began having clairvoyant dreams and even seeing or being able to communicate with spirits since I was a child, but mostly through my dreams and kind of just random occurrences, never really had control over it. I also had clairvoyant dreams. Some people sometimes, I guess, refer to as prophetic dreams that would later come true. It wasn't until I was in about my 20s or so that I really started to transition my life over to being a healer. It was something that was kind of really not necessarily planned or expected per se. At the time when it happened, I was, receiving Reiki on my own self. I would, have energy work done for me, crystal healing, Reiki healing, hypnotherapy, different types of modalities, but it wasn't really something that I necessarily thought I would branch into myself. And it was kind of one of those things where at a certain point, which certain, Reiki practitioners find, I literally started to develop what they call hot hands. So I would feel Reiki energy building up within me, causing me extreme discomfort in my feet and my hands, like a fiery burning sensation.
So not every Reiki healer experiences the physical sensation of burning in their hands?
It may not be sometimes like what leads you to it, right? That was before I received any sort of attunement whatsoever. So this was when I was just a quote-unquote normal person still. And, I did recall that, this warm sensation would come from my Reiki master's hands as he would work on me. And so I consulted him about what it was because I noticed that at the same time, psychic visions and a lot of occurrences with spirits really started to pick up around the same time as well. And what he explained to me was that basically, this life force energy or whatever as Reiki healers, we call it that we would work with, was starting to awaken and build within me. And so he suggested to me that at that time I should receive a Reiki 1 attunement that would help me to manage my energy and allow me to also be able to use this on myself and others. And it pretty much took kind of its own life from there. Once that happened, my psychic senses really kind of just took a whole different level. And from there, I continued onto the path of where I am today.
Let's talk a little bit more about where you are today and the kind of work that you do. So how did you come across soul contracts? And first of all, let's maybe discuss what they are, if you could explain that.
Well, the way I like to kind of explain soul contracts to, say, newer clients is I describe them kind of as, like, if you picture, when you owe somebody money or you owe something, whether it's to a bank, an institution, you have what we call a debt. And soul contracts essentially are very much tied to karmic ties or what we might think of as karmic debts. So anything that may have been unresolved between two souls in a previous lifetime or existence, wherever it may have been, whether on this planet or any other planet or any other dimension for that matter. And the soul contract is basically an unresolved sort of karmic payment that is due back to somebody else, is kind of how I describe it. Now, it can go both ways, right? Somebody could owe us karmically, or we could owe someone karmically. And karmic debt doesn't necessarily always mean a bad thing. It's not always something negative. It can also involve things like helping somebody else, right? We can have a soul contract to help somebody to ascend or evolve on their spiritual path, just like we could have a karmic debt to maybe create or cause some things that might not be pleasant for somebody as a means for them to learn or evolve. So a soul contract, basically it involves any sort of unresolved karma between two people, right? And so that's kind of how I describe it, right? It occurs on that soul level, and before coming into each physical lifetime, each physical body, we have all of these different souls who we have, say, karmic debt with, that we agree that in this lifetime we will run into them, we will, say, play this role in each other's lives. And whatever that contract is that we may have and whatever the debts may be, play a huge role in how our relationship with that other person or that other soul would play out.
How do soul contracts get created? Does everyone come into a life with a soul contract automatically?
Well, yes. Everybody actually does come into this life with more than just a soul contract, but with many, right? So the way to kind of, I guess, explain to people is that we're infinite beings, right? From the source of our creation, from the point of our creation, we as infinite beings chose to experience a wide range of experiences in order to be able to ascend, grow, evolve, develop virtues, and all other types of things. So from the point of our creation, we have chosen different experiences that we may have played out, whether in this lifetime, past lifetimes, right? And so basically, when we are born into this physical body, we are coming with all of these different contracts that may have been, created from the point of our creation, so to speak. And so as we come into the physical body, we then meet with all the different people that we have contracts with. Even from the person, say, that you have a brief random conversation with on the street that maybe makes your day a little better or just can ruin your day by being kind of a jerk on the road, there's usually even a contract with that person, right? Albeit brief, perhaps that short 20-second exchange was enough to repay back whatever you two had. And then there might be, on the other contrasting end, somebody that is contracted to you for you to be family members in this lifetime, or to perhaps be a life partner that you carry on for the remainder of this life.
So when you come into a life, you could be carrying contracts from past lives. So it would seem that it's almost cumulative if you're never clearing soul contracts, where you just have a ton of soul contracts from past lives, from this life.
Absolutely. Well, and what we find often is that people have, when somebody usually comes to me and we're working, say, on that soul contract level, we're not talking about just one lifetime, right? There's definitely a pattern of it being lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, which kind of gives the idea that as, time goes on, eventually, some of these karmic debts get repaid, right? Now, however, what's interesting is that as people ascend and they evolve and they continue to really go along that spiritual path or work with healers or even reach a certain point of vibration in their own selves, what we find is that there are people that are able to release and free themselves of contracts, right? Release themselves of, say, the karmic debts that they may have owed if their soul has learned what it needed to through those different experiences. We can kind of put them to rest and free others from having to be contracted to us in that way by doing what we call resolving the karmic debt, right?
So the only way to clear or complete a soul contract is if someone has paid their karmic debt?
I wouldn't say not only if, because what can happen that I've noticed is that sometimes I'll see people who have paid quite a bit of their karmic debt, but say the other person still has some to them. So they're kind of stuck in this loop of repeating the same thing. So say you've got two souls, both working towards the same eventual goals of this like the soul's transcendence or evolution and ascension. And you've got one soul that's really going along that path of Dharma, where they've really made up for a lot of the things they've done in past lives and, really closed out a lot of these contracts and really repaid them off, but yet have people that are still indebted to them, right? So they can actually still be tied to that karmic contract, to that soul contract from the other person owing to them, say. Now, in that instance, that may not serve that person's highest and best anymore, right? They've learned what they have. They've repaid their debts. And so should they choose to, they can see a healer. They can see somebody who could help them to allow them to be released of it, right? So if the other corresponding party, however, still needs to learn through certain things, they'll find somebody else that they have a certain soul contract with to create a similar type of situation with, of conflict or whatever else, in order to repay the debt, but then the person can be released. So there are ways to which we can release ourselves from these soul contracts, right? Other than just specifically having to go lifetime after lifetime after lifetime over and over again. But, it kind of depends. There's different modalities and ways that people do it. But personally, for my own self, I find that theta healing is the most effective at resolving these karmic contracts and really kind of putting them to rest for the people that are ready to and have the permission to do so.
Why would anyone want to keep a soul contract, or would they ever want to keep a soul contract?
Well, I believe that there tends to be kind of a myth with people sometimes that like, oh, if I get rid of this soul contract, I won't have this relationship with this person, or this person will leave me. Sometimes you'll see maybe an instance, particularly I'll see it in a love relationship, where somebody might be like, oh, I don't know if I want to get rid of that, right? Because there's this, kind of limited human perspective on, well, if the souls are bound by this contract and I release this contract, then therefore we will no longer be connected, right? But at the end of the day, that's not actually the truth. I've found personally that I really have very rarely, if any time, seen a soul contract that actually serves somebody's highest and best, right? Because tied to that is kind of certain karma type things that can kind of muddy up the relationship a lot of the time. So it's interesting because when I do ask, is this, soul contract for this person's highest and good, even if it's a great relationship that is absolutely amazing, oftentimes the soul contracts themselves are not for the highest and best, right? And the relationship can actually thrive even better. Or perhaps if it's not meant to be in our life, it'll allow us to have that perspective upon releasing it of what it truly is, whether or not it still serves us, so that we can become empowered to really use our free will to make the decisions that are for our best.
When you think about, like you mentioned, the example of a soul contract between two partners or two spouses, where let's say they have a soul contract where they're going to learn through some learning model like conflict or chaos or anger or something, and they have this agreement to learn and grow through that model. Why would anyone design it that way? So do you know, like, when souls design these contracts coming into lives, is there any help or kind of upper management kind of helping someone to design the best contract? Because otherwise, why would you design a soul contract where, okay, I'm going to be tied to your karma in this way and blah, blah, blah?
Well, without, I guess, getting too deep into it, because I know we might not have time to explain it all. Basically, every single soul, right, comes from what we call a soul family, which is basically like a collective of souls that are all connected through what we sometimes refer to as similar to like oversouls or, soul sources oftentimes. And each of these soul families has what we call a council of 12, which can almost be viewed as if you think about a company, when they'll have the board of directors, right, it'll be like the main top heads, the people, these decision makers. So a lot of the times actually in what we refer to as the lives between lives, kind of that point where our souls are not in a physical body and we're kind of, in between sort of the points of when we are going to reincarnate once again and when contracts are all being written up. A lot of people will have the Council of 12 that is overseeing these types of contracts, right? Because our soul contracts and karmic contracts don't always just involve us. Oftentimes, it'll involve other members of our soul family or our soul group. It'll even involve our ancestors, our past life ancestors. All of those types of things can be active within our soul contracts with others, meaning that if we just focus on releasing a contract between ourselves and others, it may still attempt to play out between us if there's a connection between the soul contracts of our ancestors and another person's ancestors. In that sense, yes, there's somewhat of, I guess you could say, like almost a collective or guides in a sense that do kind of help us to determine what we're going to come into this lifetime with, right? Because at the end of the day, given that we are kind of all connected as one, it would make sense and it's understandable as to why a lot of us, or pretty much everybody, has soul contracts that connect to other people's ancestors and past life ancestors in those deeper levels. So, of course, they would have or want to assist in having karmic debts repaid for them as well, if they can do so, right? Kind of like kill two birds with one stone type of thing.
Now, I've had friends who are healers who do energy work, and I know you have as well, who are hesitant to clear soul contracts because, like you had mentioned, they fear that it's going to change their marriage or change their relationship with their child. So can you go into some more detail about why it would improve it?
Well, one perfect example for me is that my mother and I always had a very rocky relationship since childhood. And this is kind of the way I came about releasing soul contracts to begin with. She was the first soul contract I ever released for myself personally. And I remember asking for guidance as to what to work on for myself for theta healing, what I needed to do, what would serve my highest and best. And I remember being told I needed to look at the contract between my mother and I. Things just have always been kind of the way they are. And I said, but what's really the point with this? And what I was told was that, you've got a lot of anger and frustration, resentment tied up there, and it's really going to create certain issues for you later or even health-wise. You should just release this to allow yourself to be free of any unnecessary ties, attachments energetically, so that you can resolve this and let it go for yourself, right? And upon doing that, interestingly enough, and even over time, as I've done more work on my family's, ancestral things as well, my mother and I now have a relationship that you could never have imagined or thought that we would ever have. I have friends who I've known for 25 years that are in complete and utter disbelief that we are the way we are now, because it was never like that. And we had a lot of interesting things in our contract, for example. We had vows and oaths basically for her to betray me, vows and oaths for her to reject me, all different types of things. And I had things in our contract to be an obligation to create and be a source of shame for her, create and be a source of pain for her, and things like that. So when we've got things like that in the way, right, even though we could be bound to this person, we could love this person, when you've got obligations and vows to somebody that are like that, that's really going to be very detrimental or really tough on the relationship, right? I have a lot of people sometimes that will come to me, even for soul contracts with business people they do business with, where they have these unreasonable, just completely unnecessary conflicts or disagreements, which actually oftentimes tie back to this past life karmic stuff, right? And so whether it's a love relationship or anything else, I feel that the best way to look at it is to ask, even as a healer, and go, is the soul contract with this person serving the highest good for me, the highest good for them, the highest good for our relationship? And I think that it will be very shocking to most people to realize that even if you are extremely much in love with a person, you're oftentimes going to find that that contract actually does have some certain things that are still not for the highest and best, right? So releasing the soul contract itself will not take away the love you have for one another, but what it will clear out is karmic junk, so to speak, that is not necessary or that muddies things up, is how I say it. So it just takes away what is not of this lifetime, of the true emotional connection. So what is left will be what truly is. But if you are in a relationship that you know is not for your highest and best, or that you know is holding you back, but you're staying in it out of fear of being alone, fear of what will happen to your business, your children, etc., or some sort of insecurity or fear of what people will think or anything similar to those types of things, then yes, I could see absolutely how people would be fearful of releasing that, because a lot of the times the draw back to a person over and over again, like that toxic relationship that you know is bad for you, but there's something there that you just can't put your finger on, that you always want to be back with that person. Well, surprisingly, I deal with that a lot with clients. And when I release people contracts that are in this cycle of a dysfunctional relationship that they know is not good, but they can't ever leave, they'll often find that even after just one session of just releasing the contract before you even do deeper work, they're able to receive the clarity on what it is, and that pretty much that pull to be with that person, that indescribable, almost invisible, energetic rope that, pulls them back in, just is gone and no longer exists. So it can be a very powerful thing, right?
Now, for any listener who's thinking, oh, well, I'm having trouble getting over an ex, or I want to break up with this person, but I just can't seem to, or I want to, strangle my mother every other day, and they're thinking, I do want to clear this. Do they need permission, whether it's soul permission or whatever, from the other person to clear the contract, or can you do that?
Yeah, I'm able to do so. And a lot of the times, Mike, that is a big part of the soul contract release I do, right, is exactly the example you use. And no, all I need is the consent of the person who wants to be released of it. And then I just also need to be sure with that divine creative source that it is an appropriate time for this contract to be released, right? So basically, if I have a soul contract with you, Kim, and we're involved in something and it's just back and forth drama, but finally I say, hey, I want to be released of this contract to Kim. I don't need your permission to do so, right? Because all I need is knowing that I want to be released and freed of it, right? I'm not affecting your free will. Basically, I'm saying, look, like everything that we have gone through, like I've received permission to release it. It basically means that I have learned enough through it. I've repaid enough karmic debt that I have permission to exit the contract. And so I can just say, you know what, I would like to release myself from this contract, basically. And what that would do is I would say, like, hey, look, anything that you owe me, we're good. We're even Steven, right?
Once you clear it, then could the other person, like the mother, circle back around and hook back into you and say, oh, you cleared that? Well, I'm just going to create it again.
No, I actually have not found that to be an issue, honestly, in the hundreds that I've released as of yet, right? So what I find is that I do find that, say, the other party will often find somebody else to play out similar stuff with, similar type of situations, similar type of conflicts, those types of things. Yes, I will find, but not the recreation of the soul contracts themselves, unless there is a much deeper level that hasn't been looked at, such as if it goes beyond the ancestors and beyond the corresponding parties, beyond the soul family, to the heavenly families, or to whatever else, then the contract will have to be released all the way to those degrees in order to be sure that it can stay clear.
Okay, and so then let's say someone has a contract that involves the model of abandonment with another person, and so they release that contract. Now, are they just going to create that contract of abandonment with another person?
Well, that's the thing, and that's why also belief work is really important to kind of supplement this, right? So oftentimes with contract release, I'll also take a look at what were the root vows here. What were the vows that were upholding this contract or the creation model that the person who is being released from it has? So if in this case, say it was abandonment, say, I have obligated you to abandon me. You have vows and oaths to abandon me, and I was using abandonment as a means for my soul to evolve, grow, expand, acquire virtues, whatever it may have been. Then I would also need belief work or to have programs released and upgrades made so that I no longer need to have to create abandonment to do these different things, right? So to teach my soul how to no longer be identified with that and how to create or do whatever other things abandonment was doing to serve me, I would want to be sure that that is also being done, the belief work around that, to ensure that I don't need to just find somebody else to continue to play out that same role for me over and over again.
Yeah, and that's where contracts can really be eye-opening as to what root beliefs you do have. Like, being able, I'm thinking for the listener, if they're thinking, oh, I have this contract with my mother, I really want to clear it, and then everything's just going to go away. But like you said, if they can pick out the pattern of how things play out with their mother, how their mother makes them feel, how they make their mother feel, and then you can also clear the beliefs along with the contract, that's going to be hugely life-changing for them.
Absolutely, yes.
What are some other things that are, like I thought maybe we could talk about some elements in a soul contract, such as, now you mentioned karma. I think everyone can relate to karma and kind of understands what that is. What about something like a love line?
So what I always tell people is, whether we believe in something doesn't change the fact if it's true or not, right? So a love line, what I would consider that to be, or as it was channeled to me, was a love line would be something that is often attached to some sort of old magic, usually in the form of a magic spell around love. So that is what we would kind of consider to be a love line. Another thing that we might also see in a soul contract is something like being a lifeline for another person, basically meaning a model of how we live, or that, we receive this idea that without them we can't live, right? So there's also lifelines in soul contracts as well.
So a lifeline could keep someone from maybe pursuing their own life because they're so caught up with another person's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then something like implants are part of soul contracts. Can you explain the concept of implants?
Okay, well, the way that I like to kind of explain, I guess, say implants or trackers and tracers in like a soul contract, what I call that is it's more so something that exists in, say, the morphogenic field, which I call kind of like the soul's database. It contains all of the memory, past, present, and future of every experience of the soul. Implants often, in regards to soul contracts, what I find is that once a contract is released and upgrades are done, those all disappear. But what I kind of, refer to them as to people is kind of like little karmic tracers. It's as if you microchip an animal, right? Then you can, pull up somewhere where they would find that animal if it were to get lost and turned into a shelter. Well, an implant or / tracker tracer, as I call it, will refer to kind of like almost like a microchip in the soul's memory, to where it will ensure that you find this person, that they can track you down and trace you, and it contains the information of that soul contract or that karmic debt, so that you two find each other. You find each other in each lifetime until whatever needs to be repaid is repaid, or until the soul contract has been resolved and released.
All right. And then what about something called power lines? What are those?
Well, power lines are something that were randomly channeled to me one time when I was doing ThetaHealing. And what I received on power lines was that oftentimes people, all of us have done it. We've been enslaved. We've enslaved others. We've participated in these games of slavery back and forth as part of our past life history, right, whether it was this planet or another. And oftentimes what I find is that power lines, which often create disempowerment for a person, whether it is in their life or with that specific person, tend to be rooted in a lot of stuff like previous karmic enslavement. So either they enslaved you or you enslaved them, right? So usually each party will have one with each other when I look at a contract in general, unless a lot of karmic debt has been paid, because a lot of the times it has been a back and forth thing. So that is kind of what I find power lines to be, right? Or it can be a means also to, like, say, other people may get energetically drained because this person feeds energy off of them. There can be a variety of things that would cause a power line to be present, say, in the soul contract.
You mentioned enslavement. So how would enslavement play out in someone's life today?
Now, enslavement would play out in somebody's life a little bit differently than the idea of what we have of like, oh, I am enslaved, by the old model, right? So enslavement can take a variety of forms. Enslavement doesn't mean necessarily slavery in the sense of, oh, I own this person and they do this for me. It can take the form of being a slave to money, being a slave to your company, being a slave to somebody else in the sense of like, you will always put their needs before you. You'll always take the blame for them. You'll allow yourself to be beaten down from them or to do all of this for them and receive nothing in return. You could be a slave to things like your own thoughts. You can be a slave to addiction. So slavery can actually show up in a variety of ways when we have enslavement models in place, or even say in a soul contract, for example, I have a client that I'm working with tomorrow, to where there's a very deep karmic contract between them all the way to the soul level, due to the fact that this roots back to some of his, what I call dark lives, so to speak. He comes from an oversoul source where he was what we refer to, I guess, sometimes as a godhead, or, a being who chose to, at certain points in his soul's evolution, chose to learn through a certain level of consciousness as a part of his soul's sending and developing virtues. And during that time, enslaved other souls, including the soul of this person I'm releasing a contract. And his relationship with this person is extremely volatile. It's a very karmic love relationship, to where even though he's constantly abused physically, had his property destroyed, all of these things, he still blames himself for the things wrong in his relationships. He allows himself to be publicly humiliated by this person, things that are very unlike him. And all of this actually not rooting to this life, but actually rooting all the way back to past life contracts and past life karma in which he had enslaved this particular soul as a part of a collective when he was a quote-unquote godhead or, entity being of that consciousness. And so that would be an example of how it's playing out in his life right now at this moment currently.
Because he's paying the karmic debt of being a godhead in a former life?
Yes, but the karmic debt of what he did, right, in those lifetimes or those specific lifetimes of his soul's evolution, the enslavement of all of these other souls. Like, for example, the person he's releasing the contract with, but it's more than just that, right? And so basically the karmic debts from then are still playing out in his life in different ways now, right? So releasing this contract for him and this girlfriend of his will go beyond just releasing it on this lifetime level, but all the way through the ancestral level, past life ancestor level, soul level, all of these different levels, and everywhere and throughout every multiverse, universe, dimension, plane of existence that this contract has existed, right, on any and all of those levels. And not just that, any ties that he may have had to any of the other beings that he enslaved or whatever else, right? So because that's all very much present and playing a role in what's going on today, but it's expressing itself through this relationship and actually has been expressing itself in a pattern of relationships he's had over the last 9 years, right?
Yeah, you can really see how ties, karmic debt, all those energetic ties would really build up over the different lifetimes through ancestral ties, past life ancestral ties. It's really quite the complex web.
Yeah, it really, truly is. But the beautiful thing is that, especially now, this day and age, and with things like theta healing, we don't have to be continuously bound or stuck in these loops, right? We have an outlet and an ability to be able to release and free ourselves of these things if it is divine time to do so, permission is granted to do so. That's the most beautiful thing, right? It's allowing people to really begin to transcend and ascend and evolve and live their lives in a much better way than probably has been available for a while, as far as the human species goes, and us becoming, say, less awakened or less connected to these metaphysical types of, energies that we used to be very connected to back in the ancient days.
So this is a time where we can clear contracts. So we haven't always been able to clear contracts in these earthly lives?
Not that we haven't always been able to, but as much as, there has been kind of a big major shift in the global awakening of this planet, right? To where people are becoming more open to energy healing. People are really connecting to their higher selves once again, and they are starting to break away from what culture would have considered to previously been just completely, just like, the name of this podcast, complete woo-woo or, that kind of stuff. And so it's not so much that this hasn't existed as much as it is that there was a long period of time to where, we kind of shut off that spiritual connection and focused specifically on the logical aspects of stuff, the logical mind and the conscious mind and living in a certain way. And so it's just that nowadays with this huge shift and also so many people awakening and becoming healers, we're finding ourselves all kind of taking back that power, realizing and remembering how powerful we are. And what's beautiful is with people like Diana, who's created ThetaHealing, you have modalities that are now existing and being taught and that many people are learning. Some people might use Reiki or use other forms of healing to also release these contracts. My preference being ThetaHealing because, like I said, it goes all the way through. It doesn't take me so long to work through the layers, and I can ensure that I'm really getting to each subsequent layer so the contracts can stay, as they are. So that's kind of a big part of why sort of things are coming around and changing the way they are. So it's not that we haven't been able to do this. It's just that the energies or just the evolution of our souls on this planet are starting to get to a point to where people are really being able to do so much amazing work for themselves.
Yeah, that's a good point about theta healing. That's why I prefer it as well as being able to get at either contracts or root beliefs at different levels, like this life, genetic level, past lives, and then the soul level. So it's really very thorough and quite permanent, I've found.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned the example of you and your mother and how that relationship improved. If you can maybe talk about other examples of clients that you've worked with where I think enslavement is such a prevalent thing and people may not recognize it as quote unquote enslavement. And I know you're a bit of a Godhead expert because that theme of the power lines comes up so much in your clients and it's such a deep, deep level of a contract to have. So maybe, just talk about how this might play out in someone's life so that the listener can kind of take note and learn to recognize it.
So, an interesting thing for one of my clients is I have a client, she's absolutely amazing. She's a very, very wealthy, successful businesswoman in New York, runs several companies. She does very well for herself. But she had a pattern of being used by people. No matter how much she gave, they'd always end up betraying her. They'd always end up kind of screwing her over. And she had really tumultuous relationships, whether in love, whether in business and friendships, right? And there was this big thing kind of this not understanding, like, why could I be so good to people? How could I do all these things? And yet, this is what happens all the time. Well, as we started to take a look at different contracts and models for her, we found that she had a lot of these karmic debts with people in this lifetime to where she had, say, enslaved them, like as a human being or as her role, even when she had been in her soul's evolution of consciousness, a godhead, right? And so because of residual guilt and blame and shame that she still carried from those lifetimes of doing that being in her soul's memory allowed her to anchor curses and attachments to these contracts, right, to where these people would mistreat her and she would take it. So she was a slave to others, a slave to, say, those who she enslaved, so to speak. So those who she had enslaved being her friends, her ex-husband, co-workers, people that she ran her company with. And so no matter how badly they treated her, no matter what they did, it was like she still would always feel like she was at fault or allow them to kind of walk all over her. Why? Because in previous lifetimes she had enslaved them, and therefore she carried into this lifetime now programs around being enslaved by those she enslaved. So that's an interesting little model there, right? Here you are, you've done these things, and so you choose to allow yourself to continue to be enslaved by others for the fact that you had previously done that at some point in time. And with releasing kind of those types of contracts, she now can stand up for herself, right? A lot of these people who have to create drama and do slanderous things and awful things, Well, it's just like she's no longer kind of a corresponding party to it, right? Without having to say a word, without having to do anything, it's just kind of like she's been separated because the contract no longer exists between them. So that charge, even though they may have it to themselves, even if they were to try to, create the same behaviors, the fact that she won't respond or that she's completely unaffected just eventually leads to them kind of like leaving her be. So that's sort of an example there, right? So she's a huge advocate of soul contracts. I mean, I love her to death. I mean, and she has we've released contracts between her and her own daughter, right? Her and her ex-husband, her daughter to her, soul contract between her and business partners, her and friends, right? Her and lovers, all these types of things. And even to her future divine life partner, future, life partner husband, that divine partnership. Because why? In their soul contract, now here you would think, why would a contract like this exist, right? You're dealing with somebody who's got certain things, but she even had a contract to reject and leave her divine life partner, and her divine life partner had a root vow to never find her. So imagine that. what kind of contract is that? Well, that's just how things are sometimes, right? But that also kind of ties into, the whole slavery and enslavement pieces, right? If you are a slave to others, if you're quote unquote owned by others, if you think about the model of being owned by others, or say what even old school, what human perception is of slavery, where slaves often were not allowed to have partners, husbands or wives, or they could be split up from that person at any point in time. So a slavery model for a person, or even enslavement contracts, could create the same thing, that even if they attract that lover, right? Say that lover, comes into their life, they have these things, but they're still a slave to others. Those types of things could separate them or could create these barriers to their relationship.
Yeah, and that's a good point about not being able to attract your divine life partner because you're still on some level contracted to them in another life. Like one of the beliefs that I cleared, which was powerful for me, was that I was still energetically married to my divine life partner, which is an element of the contract or of a contract. So yeah, things like that from past lives that just linger and then affect you in this life are really strong.
Absolutely. And, what's funny is that if we have these energetic marriages to others, or even energetic marriage to, say, that divine life partner, right, then the universe is like, oh, well, it's a rush to bring them together in this lifetime. They're already married, right? Or say you're energetically married to all of your ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends or who, whatever. Then those energies, alone can prevent or create a barrier for somebody to find you, right? It's kind of the idea that, you sometimes have to get rid of the old in order to make room for the new to come in, right? If you only have so much space energetically, sometimes, like, yes, we are infinite beings, but it's just that idea of, like, if I am trying to, run really fast, but I'm being weighed down by all of my past experiences or past things that just are no longer serving me, and creates this dead weight behind me that can prevent from moving forward, whether that's moving on to a new lover, moving on to a new career, right? Whatever it may be.
Yeah, definitely. Contract clearing is very powerful, especially if you are wanting to move into maybe your life purpose, which is a lot different than, say, your current day job. So yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, you had mentioned how something might play out with a soul contract, say if you were a godhead, how that might play out physically in this life with other people. How can that play out energetically? And I'll just, for lack of a better phrase, say godhead attacks or entity attacks. When you have these contracts lingering, how can that play out?
Yeah, it's funny because every time like these kinds of conversations come up where I work on this with clients, if the cats start fighting, and they're doing it right now. So it's just funny because I'm like, okay, here we are, we're talking about godheads and psychic attacks, and they start fighting. It's like clockwork every single time. Yeah. Okay, excuse me. So basically, with these types of, physical, non-physical attacks, one of the ways that they can affect us, right, is that, and it's funny because sometimes we'll call it, say, a God complex, right? Where you've got somebody that just thinks they are the most ascended thing in the world, that they are literally a God themselves, and that, that kind of mentality, right, that there's nothing above them, all that kind of stuff. So what's funny is that oftentimes that's actually not completely wrong, right? Because, yes, if you carry, say, a Godhead consciousness upon you, of course, right? Like your Godhead. So whether or not that's the true God or true creator, true source, doesn't change the fact that it is a form of God consciousness, at least that person that's experiencing it, right? Because essentially, Godheads were sometimes considered to be like, if you look at Greek mythology and the multiple gods that they had, right? Those would be considered a Godhead, so to speak. The Mayans had their own versions, right? Those would also be kind of considered Godheads, right? They're not that true creator, divine source. Rather, say, like almost an extension of God that is labeled as a God. And so with those types of things, we might often find even, I'll be honest, I have a lot of clients that will come to me with really big strings of bad luck, a lot of intense stuff that's happened in their life that's been carried over from karma and karma attached to Godheads, whether it's misfortune, financial stuff, and just really big obstacles that kind of land left and right with almost no sense or reason. Sometimes I will see it as a person noticing that they are completely blocked off from their spirituality, unable to really evolve or connect to the higher self. That might be an example of how a Godhead or some sort of attack like that could be in play, right? Because if you are connecting to something like that or have such heavy contracts to it, right, connecting to one's higher self would allow one to see the truth behind something and then seek to release themselves from it, right? So a Godhead type of thing could be shown in that way, could be apparent in that way. Then we can also have the creation of, false senses of identity. Some people might even hear voices that they think is the voice in their head that calls them to take actions they wouldn't normally want to take. They might feel the desire to do things, say things, act in a certain way, watch certain stuff that they might not usually find to be characteristic of them. That can also kind of be a symbol of, Godhead or an entity attachment, as well as people who have, say, addictions are often rooted in entity attachments and attachments of that form of consciousness. And we can also see it kind of playing out when it can even come in the form of hearing things, seeing voices, having dreams, having visions of stuff, extremely violent things, or certain stuff that is not, that can be terrifying, lowering their vibration. That can also be a symbol of it. Some people might actually feel physical things if they do have a Godhead or an entity attack, right? Energy drainage is a huge one, right? If we're interacting with somebody that, say, is attuned to a form of Reiki that is actually connecting to a Godhead, they will experience draining of the energy, sometimes after being around that person receiving energy work, even though energy work should recharge them, or the healer themselves might experience getting really tired and drained or psychic burnout. I see that a lot with people who access psychic gifts or abilities through a Godhead or healing gifts through a Godhead, right? Because that's not coming through divine source. And anytime we deal with a Godhead, there is going to be an exchange of energy of some sort. And energy can be having your money taken away. Energy can be literally your physical energy, the energy that you feel. It can be disconnect. There's all kinds of forms of ways it can manifest, but the exchange of energy will always be there. It's kind of like a give and take, right? Like I give you this and I take this from you. So whereas when we connect to divine source and we're working through those higher powers as creator of all that is, source, God, whatever you want to call it, you are not dealing with that exchange. You're dealing with just the vibration of unconditional love and infinite source, and therefore there is no drainage and no exchange of energy between yourself and creator.
Yeah, that's an important point about the drainage of energy as a healer, because a lot of times we think, oh, well, Godhead attachments or whatnot, that's only going to play out in drug addicts or, people on the street. But really, what I've noticed a lot, just noticing other people's energy, there are a lot of healers where Godhead energy can play out in that God complex, as you mentioned, where they feel they are more ascended than others, or they don't need to, do this or that. Yeah. Or they're detached from people who do have Godhead attachments. And, that means nothing,
Yeah.
about them. It's not a commentary on them. It's just others. And so it's interesting how that can even play out in the healing world, so to speak.
Yeah, and it is. And what I always tell my clients, right, because I do work with a lot of healers. I have a huge clientele of healers. So one of my favorite things, that I do love to kind of say to my clients or to joke with them about is I love to say that I always joke, I go, oh, well, Godheads love people who like to use spirituality as a badge for their ego, right? And the reason for that being kind of that, your energy is open, you know how to work with energy, right? But if you are still at a point where you're still working through certain things with your ego, Godheads absolutely love that because it's there are things that people are able to receive, right, through having a Godhead attachment. Like they could have a sudden spark in their psychic gifts. Their intuitive gifts could become stronger than they ever were before, and things like that. And so in those ways, a Godhead would be seductive. That might be a way that they would be seductive, say, to somebody that has not yet resolved, say, issues around power or issues around the ego, right? So that type of stuff is kind of I go, well, that is candy for them. That is a way to attract them, right? Because a lot of the times they're going to prefer somebody who does have an ability to work with energies, of course, and that has started to. But the thing being that if you have certain things unresolved, attachment to the ego, needing to feel superior, needing to feel better, a Godhead will be kind of attracted to that energy, right? Because it's that's kind of a very characteristic thing that I'll see sometimes with healers that have Godhead, is this sort of more ascended than everybody else. And, it's they are spiritual, and yet they're using their spirituality as just another badge for their ego. And that's not what it's about, right? It's about how we can help one another, helping the collective ascend through healing ourselves and healing others.
Yeah. And what would be the motivation then for, if a healer is getting something from Godheads and entity attachments like increased psychic powers, what would be their motivation to detach and clear those contracts?
Well, the motivation, in my opinion, would be that, at the end of the day, if you are involved in something like that, or you're working with that type of being, you are you are creating more karmic debt that will eventually need to be repaid, right? And that could take a long time. Also, too, these types of things could potentially set us back for a while. They often try to come back even after we maybe released it, right? So something that would be, in my opinion, the greatest motivation is that to know that, part of the whole thing with, say, the ideas of Godhead, that feeds also on the idea of scarcity and unworthiness in itself, right? If I believe that I can only receive my psychic gifts, my abilities as a healer through Godhead, or that it benefits me, then that is saying, or kind of shows that I have a lack maybe in Creator, or some unworthiness around my connection to Creator, right? Because if Creator, God, Source, whatever, is that ultimate divine force of infinite unconditional love and energy, right? Why would we choose to be connected to or work, closely with anything other than that, unless we believe that perhaps to a certain extent we weren't worthy of it, or that it wasn't possible for us to have that?
That's a really good point. I like that. So what would you say to skeptics who don't believe in soul contracts or don't believe in energy work?
My thing that I say to them is I go, that's wonderful, but you don't have to believe in something for it to exist, right? And the other thing I have to say to that is just that, well, that's fine. Whether or not you choose to believe it doesn't matter, because it doesn't change the fact that it's real, right? The truth doesn't care what lies you tell. It doesn't stop being the truth just because nobody believes it. And my other thing I like to joke about, and I even say to like for some clients, I'm like, yeah, whether or not you believe it's true, or whether or not like, you know, it's easy for you to accept at this time right now. And even if you never believe it in this physical lifetime, the second that you leave your physical body and step into the non-physical, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that crazy bitch was right. You know, that crazy ass female, she was right. She was not kidding, right? So, yeah.
And then can you think back to what it was that convinced you when you first started hearing about energy work? Like, what was it that convinced you that it was real?
What convinced me it was real was that, I was, you know, born having certain visions and being connected to non-physical, you know, to begin with. But other than that, I would say it was receiving Reiki for the first time and having that completely out-of-body experience to a whole different level, and really being able to feel and see what happened to me, and you know, what Reiki did for me just after one session. That in itself was enough to bring me to what I needed to know about energy work. Like, I believed in meditation. I knew the values of those types of things, you know, but I would say that was what changed things for me.
Yeah, I love it, that experiential aspect. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Carla. Well, before I let you go, would it be okay if I asked you a few fun questions to change the pace?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So when you were younger, did you have any sort of favorite singer or music group?
Oh, my gosh.
Any posters hanging on the wall or concerts that you went to?
Oh, I still think she is freaking fantastic, but it's like funny because I still love like Madonna and Mariah Carey, and I love that they both like still exist, like, and like are out there.
Oh, the classics, yeah.
Yeah, but especially like I really like Mariah Carey, especially ever since she has that one Vine video of her on the red carpet, because with her child crying, because I'm telling you, like, so many people that know me joke around and they're like, because I like to be glamorous, and they joke around. They're like, "Oh gosh, this is like so you as a mother," like, right?
Yeah. So explain to the listener what that Vine is.
Oh, well, what the Vine is Mariah Carey, and she is being presented with her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, while her son is like being pulled off of her by the nanny. And he's crying because, you know, he wants to be there with his mom, but the paparazzi's trying to take pictures, and she just kind of looks at the nanny and she's like, oh, it's okay, look at your son. I'm sure he's okay, but then she like turns around seconds later and just like keeps posing, you know, for the camera like it's nothing. And then like the caption says like, nothing will stop Mariah Carey from being glamorous, no matter who's pulling on her arm. And then it says, she came to pose, and pose she will.
Yeah, when I saw that Vine, I cracked up when I saw in, you know, just half a second, she went right back to that pose.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, and then the second question is, what do you like to do on your day off when you're not working?
I like to spend a lot of my time going to the gym and going to yoga class. It's really important for me to be physically active. It keeps me grounded in my body, and it also allows me to release a lot of the energies kind of that build up or that I take in. So I'm usually like working out, going to Pilates, going to yoga class. Like today I took a little bit more of a day off. I only had one client, so got to go to the gym and go to yoga class and just get some cooking done, which was nice.
Yeah, and back in your normal life, you were what were you, competitive?
Yeah, I was a fitness competitor.
Fitness, that's a fitness competitor.
Yeah, so I was a national level figure champion, and then I also coached several athletes that were also fitness competitors. I have a, you know, degree in nutrition and everything else, and I worked with bodybuilders, top posing seminars, and even before that, had been in fitness for a long time.
Yeah, and I love how fitness is still such an important part of your life and how it also contributes to your life as a healer too. I think that's very inspirational for people to hear that that's not something that should fall off.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's all about that synergy of everything, right?
Yeah, okay. And then lastly, what is the number one thing on your bucket list?
My number one thing on my bucket list is to awaken millions of people before I leave this physical body.
I love that.
So how to awaken millions, yeah.
Yeah, somehow finding a platform where you are reaching more people in one shot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's exciting. All right. Well, thank you so much. I loved this conversation. I love talking about Godhead, so I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just always love doing it. And if a listener feels like they may have a contract or 2 or 10 that they want to clear, or a Godhead they want out of their life, what is the best way to find you?
The best way to find me is on my website, guidedbydivine.com. And yeah, just shoot me a message on there, and that's the best way to go.
Thank you for listening to WooWoo for the Skeptic. I would love to hear about your experiences listening to the show, as well as any people you would like to hear interviewed. And if you enjoyed this episode on soul contracts, please subscribe in your podcast app so that you never miss an episode. And now for your moment of woo. This quote comes from the late Dr. Wayne Dyer, who said, "Freedom means you are unobstructed in living your life as you choose. Anything less is a form of slavery." I wish for you all a very loving and meaningful holiday season with your family and friends. Have a great week.